The moment the council voted to strip his crown, the copyist everyone ignored stood to her feet. She was Linnea, a woman paid to be invisible, her fingers stained with ink, her presence as quiet as dust motes in a sunbeam. He was Lord Alaric, ruler of the shadowed territories for 500 years, his power as absolute as the winter cold. The vote was a betrayal centuries in the making, and his reign was about to end in a bloodless coup led by men whose great-grandfathers had pledged fealty to him. But what none of them knew, not the preening lords or the ancient king himself, was that for 10 years, Linnea had not just been copying their words, she had been balancing their accounts. If you believe that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, type LEDGER below. And let me tell you what happened next. To understand how she got there, you need to know about the silence. Linnea's world was built of it. The hush of the great scriptorium, broken only by the scratch of her nib on parchment. The quiet deference she offered her employers, the Council of Lords who governed the province under Lord Alaric's distant rule. The silent dismissal in their eyes when they looked at her, if they looked at her at all. She was a function, a tool. The woman who recorded their histories, their laws, their pronouncements. She was the keeper of their words, but she had none of her own. Her wound was a quiet one, too. Years ago, her father, a master illuminator, had been ruined by this same council. Accused of forgery on a land grant, a charge concocted by a rival who coveted his royal patronage. They had stripped him of his titles, his workshop, his name. Linnea, his apprentice, was cast out with him, her own prodigious talent for calligraphy rendered worthless by association. She had taken the only work she could find, a menial copyist's role in the very halls where her father was condemned. Every day was a pilgrimage to the site of her family's destruction. Lord Alaric was a creature of a different kind of silence, the silence of the grave. He was a figure of immense power and myth, rarely seen, his presence a chill that seeped from his ancestral keep on the mountain, frosting the edges of their world. He was spoken of in whispers, a lord of shadow and winter, ancient and unchanging. He attended the council meetings only when matters of the highest importance were at stake. Today was such a day. The great hall was a theater of treachery. Lord Valerius, his face a mask of false regret, had just concluded his argument. He spoke of Alaric's detachment, his unnatural longevity, the stagnation of the province under his cold hand. He proposed a new way, a council-led governance, a vote. Each lord, one by one, had cast a black stone into a silver bowl. The sound of each click was a nail in the coffin of a dynasty. Linnea, seated at her small, unobtrusive desk to the side, recorded it all. Her hand did not tremble. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone, but her hand was steady. She wrote, "Vote of no confidence, carried. The crown of Alaric of the House of Night is hereby revoked by council decree." The final stone clicked into the bowl. Valerius smiled, a predator's gleam in his eyes. He turned to the throne where Lord Alaric sat, utterly still. The man, the creature, had not moved a muscle. He was carved from ice and shadow, his face a study in aristocratic beauty that was too perfect, too symmetrical. His eyes, the color of garnets in the candlelight, were fixed on the silver bowl. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, to writhe as if they were alive, drawn to his stillness. And that was when Linnea stood up. The scrape of her simple wooden chair was a thunderclap in the charged silence. Every head turned. Disbelief, then annoyance, flickered across to the faces of the lords, a servant, a functionary, interrupting the gravest moment in their history. Valerius's lip curled. "Sit down, girl. This does not concern you." Linnea did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the man on the throne. For the first time, she felt the full weight of his attention. It was like being pinned by a glacier. The air around her grew frigid, the flames of the nearby candelabra shrinking and turning blue. "My Lord Valerius," she said, her voice clear and steady, shockingly loud in the vast hall. "You speak of stagnation, of funds mismanaged, of a treasury depleted by the crown." She held up the ledger she had been writing in. But it was not just today's record. It was the master ledger she had maintained for a decade. "I am the keeper of these records. I have been for 10 years. My duties have included not only transcription of your meetings, but the reconciliation of the provincial accounts." A murmur went through the room. This was not common knowledge. The accounting was a dry, tedious task fobbed off on the lowest clerk, on her. "I would like to read an entry," Linnea said, her eyes still locked with Alaric's. He gave a nod so infinitesimal it was barely a movement at all. But she saw it. It was permission. She opened the book. "On the 5th of last month, Lord Valerius, you requisitioned 5,000 gold crowns for the reinforcement of the northern garrison." Her voice rang with the clarity of a bell. "My records show that the stonemasons and suppliers were paid only 1,000. The remaining 4,000 were transferred to a personal holding account under the name of your wife's cousin." Valerius went pale. "These are lies. The woman is mad or bribed." Linnea turned a page. "Lord Cadman," she said, looking at a portly man who was now sweating profusely, "your petition for funds to repair the old King's Road was granted. 10,000 crowns. The road remains a ruin, yet a new wing has appeared on your country estate. The ledgers show payments to the same architect, for the same amount, on the same day." She went on. For 10 minutes, she stood there, a small, plain woman in a drab dress, and systematically dismantled the council with their own greed, reading from the ledger in her clear, unwavering voice. She detailed the false tariffs, the ghost garrisons, the siphoned funds for canal projects that never broke ground. She had spent years tracing the labyrinth of their corruption, not out of any grand design, but simply because it was her job to make the numbers balance, and they did not. The silence in the hall was now one of shock, then of dawning fury, as the lesser lords realized the extent of the senior member's theft. When she finished, she closed the ledger with a soft thud. The sound echoed like a gavel. She looked once more at the throne. Lord Alaric had not moved, but something had changed. The garnet eyes were no longer fixed on the bowl of black stones. They were fixed on her. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the vampire king looked surprised. He rose from the throne. The movement was fluid, silent, and impossibly fast. One moment he was there, the next he was standing before her. The cold intensified, a palpable aura of ancient power. He was taller than she had imagined, a towering figure of midnight finery. The shadows in the room pooled around his feet like loyal hounds. He did not look at the sputtering, terrified councilman. He looked only at her. His voice, when he spoke, was like the shifting of old stone, deep and resonant. "You have a name." It was not a question. It was a command. "Linnea, my lord," she whispered, her courage suddenly failing her. Up close, his stillness was terrifying. It was the stillness of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. Linnea, he repeated, the name a strange music on his tongue. He reached out, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he would strike her. Instead, his gloved fingers gently took the ledger from her hands. He didn't open it. He simply held it, his gaze never leaving her face. Lord Valerius, Alaric said, his voice now carrying through the hall, each word laced with Arctic frost. You have accused my reign of stagnation. It seems the only thing growing in this province has been your own avarice. He turned his head slightly, his crimson eyes sweeping over the guilty lords. You wished for a new order. You shall have it. The shadows around him surged. Not just darkened corners, but tangible, coiling tendrils of darkness that snaked across the floor. Screams erupted. The lords scrambled back, tripping over one another. Valerius drew a sword, a foolish, desperate act. A whip of shadow lashed out, wrapping around the blade and shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Alaric paid them no mind. His world had narrowed to the small woman before him, the one who had seen the truth, the one who had spoken it. You will come with me, he said. It was not a request. He turned and began to walk toward the great doors, the shadows parting before him. He did not look back, but she knew she was to follow. Linnea stood frozen for a second, the warmth draining from her body. The lords were contained by his writhing shadows, their faces masks of terror. She had just signed their death warrants, and perhaps her own. But as she looked at his retreating back, a strange sense of inevitability settled over her. She had spent her life in the shadows of others. Now the shadows themselves had come for her. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her satchel of inks and quills, her only possessions in the world, and followed him out of the hall, leaving the life she knew behind forever. The journey to his keep was a blur of speed and silence. He led her to a carriage that seemed to be made of polished obsidian, drawn by horses as black as a starless night. Inside, the world was muffled and still. Lord Alaric sat opposite her, the ledger resting on the seat beside him. He did not speak, merely watched her with those unnerving ancient eyes. The cold in the carriage was a living thing, a pressure against her skin. His keep, when they arrived, was a fortress carved from the mountain's peak, a jagged silhouette against the moon. It was not the crumbling, haunted ruin of legend, but a place of stark, severe beauty. Polished stone floors reflected the moonlight from towering windows, and tapestries depicting forgotten constellations hung on the walls. The air was still and cold, scented with beeswax and old stone. He led her through halls that echoed with their footsteps, the only sound in the vast emptiness. There were no servants, no guards, no life at all. Only him and the shadows that clung to him like a cloak. He brought her to a library that stole her breath. It was a cathedral of books, stretching up 2 stories, with spiral staircases clinging to walls lined with leather-bound spines. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to stand in, yet it offered little warmth against the profound chill of the place. He finally spoke, his voice filling the cavernous room. This is my ledger. He gestured not to the book in his hand, but to the entire library. 500 years as ruler of this land. 1,000 before that, in other lands. Treaties, alliances, financial records, family lines, betrayals, secrets. All of it is here. Rotting, disorganized, lost. He placed the council ledger on a massive oak table. You made sense of their chaos. You saw the pattern in their greed. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. My records are infinitely more complex. The corruption you uncovered is a symptom of a deeper disease. I have grown distant. I have relied on men whose families have served mine for generations. A mistake. Trust is a currency I no longer spend. Now she understood. This was not a reward. It was a new, far more daunting job. "You want me to organize this?" she asked, her voice a small sound in the immense space. "To create a true accounting of your reign, I want you to find the rot," he said, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge. "Valerius is not the first. He is merely the boldest. His family line is riddled with treachery. I need to know how deep it goes. Who else is compromised? Who has been stealing from me, plotting against me for centuries?" He stepped closer, and the cold intensified. "You have a mind that sees what is, not what is supposed to be. You are not swayed by station or title. You see only the numbers, the facts. I require that clarity." Linnea looked from his ancient, weary face to the towering shelves of books. It was an impossible task, a life's work, a lifetime spent in this cold, silent place in the service of a creature of the night. It was a prison, however gilded. But then she thought of her father. His name ruined, his art forgotten, all because of a lie buried in a ledger. Here was a chance to wield truth as a weapon, not just for revenge, but for something more, for order, for the simple, clean satisfaction of making things right. "Why should I help you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "You are a monster, by all accounts." A flicker of something, not anger, perhaps amusement, crossed his features. "I am a king. The roles are often interchangeable, and you are no longer just a copyist. You are a witness. Valerius and his cohorts have friends. They will not forgive what you did. Out there," he gestured vaguely toward the world below, "you are a target. In here, you are under my protection." He paused, his garnet eyes seeming to look straight through her, into the quiet, wounded places in her soul. "And I will give you something no one else ever has. I will give you the truth, all of it. You will have access to knowledge no mortal has ever seen. And you will help me restore my house, a house that, for all its shadows, has kept this province safe for 5 centuries. She saw it then, the immense, crushing weight of his years, the loneliness of a ruler who could trust no one. He was not just a predator. He was a guardian, and his watch had been compromised. "And my father?" she said, the words coming out in a rush. "His name. Lord Valerius's father was the one who accused him." Alaric's expression did not change, but a new stillness fell over him. "If your father was wronged by that family, and the records prove it, his name will be cleared. I will see it done myself. You have my word." His word. The word of a king, a vampire king. Linnea looked at the endless shelves, at the daunting, impossible task ahead. Then she looked at the man who was both her captor and her protector. She was a woman who had built her life on the integrity of the written word, and here was the greatest library in the world, waiting for her. "I will need more ink," she said. "Would you have trusted him with your life's work, knowing what he was? Tell me in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, join this family." The days that followed bled into weeks, and the weeks into months. Linnea's life found a new rhythm, governed not by the sun, but by the burning of candles and the silent presence of the Lord of the Keep. She was given a suite of rooms, comfortable and warm, a stark contrast to the rest of the cold fortress. but she spent most of her waking hours in the library, a space that had become her entire world. Alaric was a creature of the night. He would appear as dusk fell, a silent shadow materializing in the doorway, to see her progress. He never disturbed her, but would stand for long periods, watching her work, his crimson eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Sometimes he would retrieve a specific tome she requested, his movements impossibly swift and silent, his long fingers handling the ancient, crumbling books with a familiarity that spoke of centuries. She began with the Valerius family records. Crate after crate of scrolls and ledgers were brought from the deepest vaults. The ink was faded, the parchment brittle. It was a painstaking process of cross-referencing, of finding a single name mentioned in a shipping manifest from 200 years ago and matching it to a treasury disbursement in a different ledger. She discovered she was not just an accountant. She was a detective, an archaeologist of ink and paper, and she was brilliant at it. Alaric began to speak to her during his nightly vigils. At first, it was merely to answer her questions about a certain currency or a forgotten noble house. But slowly, the conversations deepened. He would see a name she was working on and offer a story, a memory from a time when that name belonged to a living man. "Marius Valerius," he murmured one night, looking over her shoulder at a document she was transcribing. The cold of his presence was so near, she could feel it on the nape of her neck. He had a laugh like a barking dog, and he cheated at cards. Linnea looked up, startled. "You knew him?" "I knew his great-grandfather," Alaric corrected, his voice tinged with a melancholy that was as deep as time itself. "Families develop habits. The Valerius clan has always had a habit of taking what is not theirs." These small moments were islands in the vast ocean of her work. They built a strange, quiet intimacy between them. He never touched her, but his proximity was a constant, charged presence. She became attuned to the subtle shifts in his stillness, the faint narrowing of his eyes that signaled interest, the almost imperceptible tensing of his jaw that meant he was recalling a painful memory. She learned to read him the way she read her ledgers. She saw the loneliness in the way he watched her, the deep weariness of his immortality. He was a king, a predator, a monster, but he was also utterly, profoundly alone. One night, exhausted, she fell asleep at her desk, her cheek resting on an open ledger. She awoke with a start, not to a sound, but to a change in the air. A heavy blanket had been draped over her shoulders, a rich velvet that smelled faintly of cold stone and winter air. Alaric was standing by the fireplace, his back to her, staring into the flames. The shadows in the room were calm, resting at his feet. She said nothing, merely pulled the blanket tighter around herself. It was the kindest gesture anyone had shown her in years. She found the proof she was looking for a month later. A letter tucked inside a book on falconry, written by the elder Lord Valerius to his conspirator. It detailed the plot to frame her father, to forge the land grant and discredit him to gain his royal commission for illuminating the Great Charter. It was all there, in black and white. The truth, buried for 20 years. She sat back in her chair, the letter trembling in her hand, tears blurring her vision. A quiet sound made her look up. Alaric was standing before her desk, his face impassive, but his eyes were fixed on the letter. "You have found it," he stated. She could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering for a moment, before his fingers gently brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was shockingly cold, like marble, but it was not unkind. It was the first time he had ever touched her skin. The contact was electric, a jolt of ancient cold and silent strength. The shadows in the room stirred, a soft whisper of movement. "His name will be restored," Alaric said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "His work will be returned to the royal archives. His honor will be made whole. I gave you my word." In that moment, looking into his ancient, sorrowful eyes, she felt a bond forged between them, a bond of shared purpose, of quiet understanding. He was not just her protector or her employer. He was the only person in the world who truly saw her, not as a functionary, not as a disgraced daughter, but as Linnea, the woman who found the truth. The threat, when it came, was not subtle. Lord Valerius had allies, powerful and old, who had escaped Alaric's initial purge. From exile they plotted. They could not breach the defenses of the keep, so they targeted her in the only way they could: her reputation, her past. A pamphlet appeared in the city below, distributed in secret. It accused Linnea of being the vampire king's thrall, a witch who had used dark arts to ensnare him and condemn the noble council. It twisted her work into a narrative of sorcery, claiming the ledgers were filled with spells, not numbers. It painted her as a power-hungry seductress, the monstrous consort of a monstrous king. Alaric brought one to her, his rage a palpable force that made the very stones of the keep seem to vibrate. The pages of the pamphlet smoked where his fingers touched them. "They dare," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "They attack you to get to me. I will hunt them down. I will tear them from their hiding places and unmake them." The shadows around him boiled, rising up the walls like black flames. The crimson in his eyes burned with a terrifying light. This was the predator she had heard stories about, the full might of his ancient fury unleashed, and it was all on her behalf. She looked at the pamphlet, at the vile words, the cruel caricature of her face. It was the same lie that had destroyed her father, just wrapped in a different kind of poison. She should have been afraid. But looking at Alaric, at the raw, protective power emanating from him, she felt a strange calm. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He turned his burning gaze on her. "No, hunting them down will only prove their point," she explained, her mind already working, seeing the patterns. "It will make you look like a tyrant, and me a witch who commands you. They are using lies. We must use the truth. It's a stronger weapon." He stared at her, his fury warring with his surprise. "What do you propose?" "A demonstration," she said. "A public accounting. You will summon the remaining lesser lords, the guild masters, the merchants, all the people the council was stealing from. You will bring them here, to this keep, and I will not stand behind you. I will stand beside you. I will present my findings. Not as an accuser, but as an archivist. I will show them the numbers, the truth of how their province was being bled dry by the very men who claimed to serve them." Alaric's rage slowly subsided, replaced by a dawning respect. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with quiet, unyielding conviction. She was not a victim to be avenged. She was a partner in this war. "They will not see a copyist," he said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. "They will see a queen." The great hall of the keep was opened for the first time in a century. The lesser lords and prominent citizens of the province arrived, trembling with fear and curiosity, ushered into the vast, cold space by silent, shadowy attendants that seemed to be extensions of Alaric's own will. Lord Alaric sat upon his throne of black basalt, a formidable, silent presence. But this time he was not alone. To his right, on a slightly smaller but no less dignified chair, sat Linnea. And before her was not a small copyist's desk, but a massive lectern upon which rested the great ledgers of the province. She was dressed not in her drab work clothes, but in a gown of deep blue velvet, a gift from him that made her eyes shine. She was nervous, her hands cold, but as she looked out at the assembled faces, she felt a surge of purpose. When the hall was full, she stood. She began to speak, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. She did not read accusations. She read accounts. She walked them through the grain tariffs, showing how the council had inflated prices to line their own pockets while the common people went hungry. She showed them the records of the weavers' guild taxes and how half the money never reached the provincial treasury. She spoke for over an hour, her voice never faltering. She used their own numbers, their own records, to paint a devastating portrait of corruption. The murmurs in the crowd grew from fearful whispers to angry shouts. They were not seeing a witch. They were seeing a scholar, a woman of unimpeachable logic, who was showing them exactly how they had been betrayed. When she finished, she presented the letter that exonerated her father. She read it aloud, her voice thick with emotion for the first time. My father, Master Aris, was a true artist and an honest man. He was destroyed by the greed of Lord Valerius's father, so that man could steal a commission. This is the truth. It is written here. A profound silence fell over the hall. The truth, clean and sharp, had cut through decades of lies. The people looked at her not with suspicion, but with awe and gratitude. They looked at the silent king on his throne, and for the first time, they understood. He was not a distant, neglectful ruler. He was a king who had been betrayed by his own vassals, and this quiet, brilliant woman had given him the tools to reclaim his house. Alaric rose. The house of Valerius is attainted, he declared, his voice like the crack of winter ice. Their lands and titles are forfeit to the crown. Their stolen wealth will be used to repay what was taken from the people of this province. He then looked at Linnea, and the gaze he gave her was filled with a possessive, profound pride that made her heart ache. And I name Linnea, daughter of Aris, as the first royal archivist of this province. Her word on matters of record is law. Her office is second only to my own. To question her is to question me, to threaten her, he let his crimson eyes sweep across the crowd, is to invite an ending. It was a declaration, a formalization of her place at his side. She was no longer the invisible copyist. She was the keeper of the king's truth, and her old wounds, the shame and dismissal that had haunted her for years, were not just healed, but transformed into a crown of her own. The world that had thrown her away now bowed to her. A year passed. The province began to heal under Alaric's renewed and far more direct rule. With Linnea's guidance, the treasury was refilled, fair laws were enacted, and the rot of corruption was systematically cut away. The keep was no longer a silent, empty place. It was the center of a just government, and Linnea was its heart. She and Alaric were rarely apart. Their evenings were spent in the library, but now they often sat in comfortable chairs by the fire, reading or simply talking. The silence between them was no longer a void, but a comfortable space filled with deep, unspoken understanding. The profound chill that had always surrounded him seemed to lessen in her presence, the shadows in the room content to lie sleeping at his feet. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the tall windows, she looked at his face so achingly beautiful and unchanging in the firelight. The question of her own mortality, a quiet hum beneath the surface of their life together, rose to the forefront. She would grow old. She would die. And he would remain. As if sensing her thoughts, he put down his book and looked at her. "You are thinking of time," he said. "I am," she admitted, her voice soft. "I am thinking that my ledger will one day have a final page." He rose and came to her, kneeling before her chair. He took her hand, his cold fingers lacing with her warm ones. His garnet eyes were filled with an emotion she had never seen before, a vulnerability that shattered her. "I have lived for more than 1,000 years, Linnea," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I have seen empires rise and fall like the tides. I have watched stars shift in the sky. And in all that time I have never felt seen. Not until you stood up in that hall, armed with nothing but ink and the truth." He brought her hand to his lips, his mouth cold against her skin. It was a gesture of profound reverence. "Your life is a precious, finite thing, a flickering candle against my endless night. I will not be the one to extinguish it, nor will I force you to share my curse." He met her eyes, his own shining with the weight of his promise. "But if, when your hair is silver and your pages are full, you wish for more time at my side, if you choose to share my eternity, the choice will be yours, and yours alone. I will wait. I can do nothing else, for you have balanced my accounts, Linnea. You have made me whole." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the ancient, powerful being kneeling before her, the vampire king, who had offered her not a command, but a choice, who had seen the quiet copyist and valued her above all others. She reached out her free hand and gently touched his face, her warm palm against his cool marble skin. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief moment, a silent surrender to the woman who had walked into his frozen world and taught its king how to feel again. The fire crackled in the hearth, the snow fell outside, and in the heart of the ancient keep, a new history was just beginning to be written. For more stories where quiet integrity conquers loud ambition, and where a forgotten woman's meticulous mind becomes her unbreakable crown, subscribe to Herb Files. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe and I will see you in the next one.